So, I know some of you. I don't know the rest of you. My name is Justin, and I'm a fraud. To explain that, I have to explain how I got here. I don't mean explain how I got to Monktoberfest. Steve actually already showed you about that. Right? That's my face is that little one on the left and the bottom there, and I've been here ever since. But in addition to the conference being inspired by a tweet and a joke, my inspiration to think about this talk also came from a tweet by someone else that I respect, who was asking to hear more, which is an unusual thing to ask, really, from men. About vulnerability and about imposter syndrome. If you don't know what imposter syndrome is, it's not about intentionally pretending to be someone else. It's not, for instance, if it's Rowan Atkinson pretending to be me, right? It's when you can't internalize your own successes and your own strengths. And so you go through life and your career terrified that you're going to be found out, that people will discover that you're a fraud. Over the past couple of years, a lot of people have written about this, have written about their own struggles with imposter syndrome, with how their own lack of privilege made it more difficult, or how to help other people. I'm not putting all these URLs up here for you to need to read or type in, but to make the point that I'm the wrong person to tell you about that, and a lot of other people have written about that. And if you're coming from a point of less privilege, where imposter syndrome might be seriously holding back yourself, I shouldn't tell you about that. There are people whose own lived experiences are going to be better for you about that. If I stand up on a stage and start to try to tell someone who's a woman or a person of color or otherwise about how to be better at what they are, well, I would really hope that you would stop me. That would be a very bad idea. The only people whose personal lives, my own experiences, really should be told to are the people that look like me. Okay, he looks a lot better than me, and he dances a lot better than me. And actually, I can't give Channing Tatum any advice at all, because he was asked a question recently about feminism, and his answer blew me away. He said, well, I'd like to call myself a feminist, but I haven't studied it enough to know exactly everything that would mean. So I'll just say I think I'm pro-feminism, but you don't want to hear too much from me on that. And that level of self-awareness, of lack of qualification to keep speaking about something, is actually pretty unusual in someone that looks like me or someone that looks like him. And so, when it comes to speaking about this kind of social science and so on, I want to make it really clear that I am no better than he is in that regard, certainly. For coming to a conference about technology and beer and everything social, I'm going to talk about the one of those things I'm least qualified to talk about. But when explaining how I did come to be here, if I back up to a time where, so for those of you who are like me in another way, who are in our 40s and are in software, well, I grew up in a unique time, right? When personal computers were becoming possible, but hadn't yet become defined. And so you wouldn't bring home a set of applications, you'd bring home a box full of problems to be solved. And for anyone that didn't really participate in that particular time and place, a bunch of us learned to program literally by typing in entire programs with no text editor, line by line, in BASIC or in assembly. And that is a tedious and ridiculous process.
But it was so much fun.
It was. And once you actually pull it off a few times, it makes you feel like you've got a little bit of magic, right? So by the time I was 18 or so, I felt like I could walk on walls. Actually, that's a bad example. I could walk on walls. So I'll give you a better example, a more recent example. Someone came to me for career advice. And, that's a humbling thing in the first place. Actually, no, everyone says humbling, and they don't mean it. They mean it makes you proud. It's the opposite. But they explained why they came to me with a deep question about their own career. And they said, well, I looked at everything you've done in your career, and will you control your destiny? Whoa. You know how hearing that makes you feel? Makes you feel cool. I mean, not the very coolest, right? I mean, that's way out of reach, but still, it makes you feel cool. And if you go through your life and your career having people say things like that to you, really no matter what you do, certain ideas become seductive. Ideas like meritocracy. Ideas that even people that should know better, people that know where that word came from, still find it so seductive because they'd like to believe that success, since they're successful, correlates with merit. People that should know better still unironically try to find some way to apply it to themselves, to say that this is a thing. And when I say that even people that know where it came from, I'd be surprised if anyone here hadn't heard the word, but some of you might not realize that the concept and the word meritocracy was created as satire. It's worse than nonsense. It's not a thing. And one of the best explanations I've seen of why privilege makes meritocracy impossible was written by John Scalzi in his blog, who came up with this fantastic metaphor about how going through life as someone that's white, male, presenting as straight, checking all the privilege boxes, right, is like playing a massively multiplayer game, but you get to play on the lowest difficulty setting. Now, if you're someone that might find the idea of meritocracy appealing, this metaphor and this idea might cause you to freak out a little bit and want to respond to me, and I'm going to ask you to chill out and not do so, because this is actually a really good metaphor. It's not perfect, no metaphor is. But it doesn't say you can't have some other disadvantage, like having no money. It doesn't say you can't lose the game. It doesn't say someone playing on a harder difficulty setting, someone less privileged than you, can't succeed more than you. None of those things make this go away. Because all it's saying is that you're living and working and operating in a society and a system that is structured toward your success. And that's what I mean when I say that I'm a fraud. What I mean is that it is impossible to separate my success from my privilege. Now, this is a really uncomfortable thing to come to terms with about yourself. So, you don't usually figure this out about yourself on your own. I wasn't able to start thinking about this until I met someone better than me and smarter than me, who told me something. Well, actually, she told me a lot of things, but one of them was, she said to me, "You're better at seeming right than at being right." Now this is, like I said, someone that I had already developed enough respect for that I couldn't blow this off and keep walking. Someone I had to listen to and had to think about. And so that led me on a very eye-opening personal journey that's not over yet. Along the way, I've made a bunch of mistakes. I've gotten wrapped up around myself more than once. But still, it's been very eye-opening. One of the deeper realizations along the way was the very fact that she'd had to point it out to me. That actually got to me in some ways more than the behavior itself. Because while I had been unaware of some of the behavior that I'd been enacting, I was well enough read and educated to know about things like Dunning-Kruger syndrome, which is really just the notion, in this case, that lack of awareness, actually pretty often lack of self-awareness, correlates to a lack of, well, merit. And in thinking about that, I did come to realize a couple things about myself, and one of them is that I don't have imposter syndrome. You can, and someone like me can. This is not to say that someone who's more privileged can't have imposter syndrome. I know from personal example people that do and that it's difficult for. It may not hold them back as much as, say, it would someone with less privilege, but it's still a real thing. But I think I had something, still probably do, that's more common, maybe more boring, but also maybe more damaging than that. And it's simply a persona of confidence in ways that might not always be warranted. But, coming to realize that, it would be entirely maybe reasonable of someone like myself to say, yeah, and? Right? Who cares? Because after all, especially in the software industry, sometimes that's considered an asset. I've seen people that have said that one of the best ways to actually get ahead and get an accelerated career in this industry is to fake it and then catch up with yourself. And that approach is kind of likely to work out for you if you look like me. But it's harder to do this once you've looked at it yourself. Because then the same sorts of words that used to make you feel cool feel a lot more hollow. And I hadn't ever intended to behave that way. I'd always wanted to be the best that I could be, right? I'd cared a great deal about being the best person I could. But, once you're aware of your persona, once you're aware that you're wearing a mask, well, the mask hurts just as much to keep wearing as it does to take off. So, that idea of being the best that I can be gets a lot more difficult. Because once I realized that I'm in an environment that's structurally set up for me to succeed, well, I can't tell if I'm doing things well, right? I can't tell if I'm getting better, if you can't measure what I'm doing, if I'm going to be applauded anyway, right? A bunch of us have been told you can't improve what you can't measure, right? And I can't measure things in this way. So isn't that true? Well, I think luckily it's not true. I don't know how to measure generosity. I don't know how to measure integrity. And it turns out those are the things that I value most in the people that I value most. But to try to get better at those things, I have to not worry about being the best I can be and try to figure out how to do the best I can do. I'd rather do something than be someone. But still, that's all. I'm looking at myself. You could chalk off this entire conversation with myself as narcissism, right? Some white, male, privileged guy now has figured out that he should feel badly about himself. Again, so what? Who cares? Does that matter at all? Well, I think it does matter, because that confidence that we're encouraged to have, that persona that we're encouraged to show off, when we throw ourselves into the center of the room. It doesn't just hurt us, right? I mean, this, this chest beating, this loudness is destructive to ourselves and to other people. And once you notice it in yourself, something scary happens because you start paying attention and you realize that everyone else already knew. They just didn't want to tell you. It wasn't worth it. And you realize that those of us behaving that way were the reason that our lives and our work were getting weaker because of the people that were driving away through that behavior. So it doesn't just matter to our own feelings. It matters to our industry and to our lives. And there are a lot of people already rightly very angry that were considered normal for acting this way. And so once I got a little bit angry too, mostly at myself for being who she's talking about, I had to figure out if there was something I could try to do differently. And, well, I found one thing. It's not everything I could do. It's not everything I should do. But it's something I can do, and it's a start. And that's when someone who's not playing on the lowest difficulty setting is acting or speaking and is at the moment the center of attention, to simply let that continue. That's simple, but it's not easy if you've been trained by being rewarded over and over again every time you start talking, every time you raise your hand, every time you put yourself in the center of the room. And this turns out to be very powerful, not just for those people that you're now trying to pay attention to that are in front of you, but in my case, it allows me to look and see the people that actually ought to be in the center of the room. I mean, just a few examples of the kinds of people I mean are Megan Smith, the CTO of the United States. Elizabeth Holmes, she didn't start a company to disrupt something or sharing something or something for 20-something white guys in San Francisco, but to change the way blood testing works. Or Margaret Hamilton, first software engineer, arguably the reason why the Apollo 11 landed instead of crashing on the moon. Or Yanbing Li, my boss, who I intend to learn a lot more from. Or James Mickens, not only a great computer scientist, he is a way better and much funnier speaker than I could ever be. Or when it comes to speakers, Kayla Banks. If you were at OSCON, she rocked the main stage at OSCON in front of thousands of people, and she's 13. When I was 13, that would be just completely unthinkable. And she's up there being undefinably great. Or another kid, Ahmed. It wasn't just that he made something in an effort to find other kids that would want to make things, but that when he was treated despicably, he handled that spotlight with grace that most 40-year-olds, let alone 14-year-olds, could not have. If we step farther away from our industry, right, Nazia, she's better with a sword than I am, better with a stick than I am. Oh, and she's an astrophysicist. So, I mean, these people, and this is just a fairly random, small selection of the kinds of people I mean. These people are the kinds of people that can be role models to people that need role models. I didn't need a role model. I was probably going to be okay anyway. But if we're a little quieter, and we make a little more room for the next generation of people like that, we'll have more of those people that deserve to be in the center of the room, that are a little too easy to speak over. They're a little too easy to drive away. And I need for that to happen, because one of the things I figured out is that without those people in the room, it's impossible to do the best work. And so I'm still trying to figure out what else I can do, one day at a time. Thank you for listening.